let's talk about soup. And soup sucks, it's completely useless, it's super annoying, and it's generally speaking just a super terrible activity, and auditors don't even have a great way of checking it, and they don't even understand it themselves. So with that introduction, you're probably really looking forward to this fascinating and very exciting video. Well, maybe or maybe not. Maybe a great way to, a great story as the introduction is actually in one of the competent authority audits. So you have different states in Germany audit medical device manufacturers if they're class 1 manufacturers, a bit simplified. So we got audited by the Berlin authority, and it was, I think, 2 or 3 people. And then during the audit, they were asking us like, oh, by the way, what's soup? And I thought this was pretty crazy because they should be auditing us. So if someone explains stuff, it's actually them explaining stuff to us. But they had absolutely no clue. And they were like auditing us with a medical software device. So I thought that was pretty funny. And that kind of like speaks about how well this industry essentially works or doesn't work, and how well auditors understand software. Essentially, they don't. Many auditors don't. So with that out of the way, let's talk about soup. Soup is about documenting your third-party libraries. So if you're a technical person or a software developer or both, then libraries is essentially just the code you get from GitHub, your dependencies. And that's something you have to document in your medical device compliance documentation. How does that look like in the standard? So if you search for soup, you get a few, references. So soup is Software of Unknown Provenance, an acronym, no shit. Software items that is already, a software item that is already developed and generally available, and that has not been developed for the purpose of being incorporated into the medical device. Also known as off-the-shelf software, blah, 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 blah. Okay, yeah, so that's soup. And then you have different requirements for soup as soon as I'm able to type on this keyboard. Okay, so you need to like do something like called specify functional and performance requirements of soup items, specify hardware and software requirements, and also do some sort of like risk analysis. So somewhere, like for example, okay, you have to identify potential causes of contribution to a hazardous situation, failure, or unexpected results from soup. So long story short, you have to do a risk analysis of these soup things. What's an example of soup? We'll actually look into that, but it's just typical dependencies. Like if you're coding in JavaScript, if you're building a mobile app in JavaScript, then for example, React or React Native, which are fairly common, maintained by Facebook or Meta actually. So those are examples of soup. How does that look in practice? So if you go to our templates, 62304 templates here, and you search for soup, you find something called a soup list. And then, and then you find this super terrible well, it's not super terrible. It's our template, so it's not terrible. But it's the idea, the whole concept of soup is terrible. And you find this document which has this this table at the bottom. So you can see, okay, for each of your dependencies or libraries, you give it an ID starting at 1. You're associated with a software system, package name. In this case, React Native. React Native is a great example. So apparently, me 5 years ago, I had the exact same example, which is great. So I guess things don't change that much across 5 years. Programming language version, the link which points to the, I think, official website link here, which still exists, so that's cool. It's in JavaScript, you never know if something exists tomorrow. Last verified ad, what I'll talk about in a bit. Risk level, I'll also talk about that. Requirements, and verification reasoning. Okay, a lot of this is kind of like cryptical, but first I'll kind of like talk about how you fill this out in general, and then we'll talk about the content, what these columns actually mean. And yeah, all of it sucks. Okay, how can you fill this out? Two options, as always. Either you're using your own software, which is like Google Docs, Google Sheets, Jira, Confluence, that sort of software, some of it super terrible, as you know, some of it not. Or you're using Formwork, our software, which of course is extremely awesome. I'm biased. Now, if you would be using your own software, then you would be copy-pasting this to some document, for example, a Google Doc. So you could download it as a Word file, or you could just use this HTML output and copy-paste that to a Google Doc and then start editing this table, or if you're fancy, you could just take only this table and make a Google Sheet out of it and edit it. And that's what I did in the past, and that works okay, besides the fact that this whole activity is useless. If you do it in Formwork, there's actually not that much of a fancy feature for you to automate this in Formwork, because in our experience, you just need this list, full stop, but auditors aren't gonna like drill down into everything, and you don't need fancy software features to automate a lot of this. You just need to create the list and you're done. There's not that much work to automate, to be fair. So Formwork has this, in the product section, it has this thing called records. So you can create a record, which is essentially just a rich text thing where you type it here. And of course, it would be super annoying if you would have to like copy paste these contents into this. So we created a few features for that. And it's not super intuitive. You go to the QMS section, open regulatory templates, and here you find all the templates from the website. Actually, they're preloaded in Formwork, which is a huge efficiency gain for you. Technical documentation, and then here's the soup list, and you see like, hey, cool, it's the same template like on the website. And then now you can actually just copy this to your product, which is pretty cool. So you say create new record using this as a template, so essentially copy it. And then here you select your product, the test depression app. And below here we can already edit it. So let's actually add another entry, software system, maybe the backend, package name Rails. We like Rails, Ruby. Rails 8 just came out, so that's very cool. You can look for the link later. Verify this today. I'll talk about that in a bit. Risk level low because it's always low. We'll talk about that too. Requirements runs on server hardware or whatever, and then like spec out your server hardware here. Verification reasoning, copy paste this, which is a huge hack, and we'll talk about that too. And then we'll save that. And then you'll see, you actually see now this, oh, did I actually click here? You'll see now we're in the product section, and this got copied over to the records section in the product. So we're in the test depression app product, records, now you have a soup list here, and that's very cool. Most importantly, the one big efficiency gain you get here with Formwork is that this is of course versioned and archived. So we are editing it for version 0.1 of our product right now. If we went ahead and created a new release in the future, 0.2 for example, this gets frozen for 0.1. And the cool thing is it gets copied over for 0.2. So you go over, then you have your 0.2 release here, you select that, and then you have already a copy of your soup list here with all the entries, and then you can just edit that and update it based on the libraries you now added or removed or updated in your newest product version. So that's a huge efficiency gain, because in Google Docs or Google Sheets, it's a gigantic mess because you have to like copy paste everything to a new folder and everything, and make sure you archive things properly, because again, an auditor might come in and say like, hey, please pull up the soup list for version 0.1 of your software, and that might be a version which is already 1 or 2 years old. So Formwork has you covered there pretty well, even though this whole table, of course, still sucks. Now, let's talk about the content. So what about these weird columns? So the first column is simple. It's a software system. So this relates to the software system, which we already also documented here in Formwork. If you remember, we actually had, we have two systems here. We have the smartphone app and the backend, and these should be resembled in this column too. So actually this is not super correct, because this says mobile app. We could use also the abbreviation here, which we defined here, app and backend, BECK, maybe like this. So that's cool. Save that. And so that column is explained. Okay, only 10 columns to go. Package name is pretty clear. That's what you have in your package.json or gem file if you're a programmer. So that's the name of the actual dependency in your code. Programming language is also clear. The version is also clear. It's the version you're including. A website, you can add that. Okay, and now about all these other columns. One of the regulatory requirements is that you have to do something called a verification of your soup. The funny thing is because the standard is essentially 20 years old and probably the content is 30 years old, people probably in the meantime have simply forgotten what they meant by doing verification, and the standard doesn't tell you, because the standard just says, hey, verify your soup. So the modern interpretation of this is you just kind of like look at it and essentially say it's okay. And the way you do that is with the verification reasoning here. So you say, okay, look, this soup, it is commonly used, it's maintained by a large organization, Facebook, and it has sufficient test coverage. And by the way, this sentence applies to all the soup magically. And essentially, and this is just like, to some degree it makes sense, because this is what a human would think if they look at this dependency. You would look at React Native and say like, oh my god, do we need to read all the code ourselves to make sure that it's safe? And do we need to test it ourselves to make sure that it's safe? The answer, of course, any rational human would say, no, we do not, because it's a very common package. It's maintained by a large company, and it's already well tested. It has a test suite. We may not have checked all those tests, and we may not have executed them ourselves. But we believe that this software is fit for our purpose, so it's essentially verified. And that's the activity you're doing here. So we did this today on February 2nd. And we said like, yes, this is good software. And that's how you fulfill regulatory requirements of verification. And then we have these two other columns, risk level and, let's do the requirements first. So you have to define requirements for your soup. And that's just one of the other regulatory requirements. And that's because regulators are completely decoupled from the real world. So let me explain what I mean by that. In the regulator's brain, it is you calling in a meeting with your entire company, with 10 people, with all developers, and saying like, oh my god, we need a new soup and we need to bring a new soup into our code base. Let's take 1 hour and write down all the requirements we have for the soup. Like maybe we want to pass strings or whatever. Okay, like requirement 1, pass strings. And requirement 2, like whatever, don't crash. And then like after this very lengthy meeting where you would have a list of requirements, you would do a very structured research into all possible dependencies you could find on GitHub or wherever, and which one meets your requirements. Now, this, of course, is not how software development happens in the real world. In the real world, it's just like one developer, dude or dudess, writing code and just saying like, oh yeah, need a new dependency. Okay, I pull it in. Hey, I have two. There are 2 different ones. Yeah, I'll take the one with more GitHub stars. Done. And it's done like within 2 minutes. And so that's how stuff happens in the real world. But the regulators are usually not in this real world. They kind of like are in their own world where they're thinking of requirements lists and structured meetings and planning documents. So this is how regulators essentially think how libraries are being selected. And one of the causes for this is also that most auditors, I would say 9 out of 10 auditors, don't know how to write code. Or maybe the last time they've touched code was like 50 years ago when they were coding mainframes and COBOL or whatever. So this is essentially just detached from reality. Nonetheless, you need to come up with a requirements list, which could be just one requirement per soup, and document it here just so you fulfill the regulatory obligations. Again, none of this makes sense. And again, you need to do a risk assessment, which we saw earlier. And the hack for this is you define these risk levels, low, medium, high. And if it's low, you don't really need to do anything. And oh, by some magical reason, it's always low. So that's the situation. All right. So that's the soup table. Maybe to finish this extremely annoying, useless, and boring topic, there's like one anecdote I can tell. And there's once a customer from another country was a potential customer we were thinking of working together when I was still doing consulting back in the Stone Age. And they were like, yeah, we don't have a soup list yet. And I was like, yeah, I mean, use a template, write it down, explain it to them. And they were like, yeah, can't you give us a soup list? I'm like, hold on, what? I don't have your software, I don't have your code. Like, how should I write the soup list? And they're like, yeah, just give us any soup list. And I'm like, what? And then I kind of like realized, well, I mean, most auditors, again, are not technical. So they will just kind of like look at this document, at the soup list, and go like, yeah, it looks complete. It has all the right columns. It looks fine. Okay, like the checkbox is checked in the audit. Let's move on to the next topic. So I'm not saying like you should create a soup list which is not rooted in reality and do this approach. By the way, I rejected that client because they were doing super shady stuff, which says many things about this industry. But I'm just saying like there is no easy way for an auditor to actually verify this, that what you write in your soup list is actually in your code. So I don't want to give you some crazy ideas, but well, I'm just saying what auditors look at is whether you have the soup list and whether your method is generally fine. it's extremely unlikely that they will go into your package.json file or gem file and actually kind of like sync this up with the document, because they also don't have enough time for that. And again, it's very unlikely they even are able to read code. So that's soup. It's completely useless. Good luck doing it. Finally, always the recommendation, just like with software requirements and software tests, don't do this while you're still deep in development. Do this once your first software version is mostly done. So just prior to release, or prior to release of your first prototype, for example. So this intuitively, this makes sense, because if you do this now while you're still developing, you come up with a list, that's cool, but then next week or in 2 weeks, you have to rewrite half of the list because you rewrote half of your software. And that's a very inefficient way of doing a soup list. So do it once in the end, and do it from beginning to end in like, I don't know, 1 hour or so, and you're done. And that's the most efficient way you can do things. All right, good luck with the soup. See you in the next video.